Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Mindful Constitution podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Tonight, I am here with Alex Franklyn, who is a mental health expert and also brings in a lot of her expertise from lived experience. She is an author of Plenish Your Self-Worth. Yes. Will you read the second part for me? The line, Plenish your self-worth, and then
How to be yourself despite the controlling behavior of others.
thank you. I was like, I don't want to
Real
mess this
simple.
up. How to be yourself despite the controlling behaviors of others. It's an introductory edition. She has plans to write a lengthier, full version, but such a good one. It's a quick read with so much insight. And so we're going to dig into, how controlling behaviors, specifically like early in life as well, can impact the trajectory of our relationships throughout our life, which I think is particularly relatable for a lot of people who identify as empaths and highly sensitive people, but really everyone. And so, Alex, I would love for you to welcome, by the way.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm
Wonderful.
so
Thank
happy.
you.
Yeah, I'm so happy you're here to chit chat with me. So, share first a little bit about your journey to where you're at and what inspired you to write your book.
Well, gosh, where to start? I think that for the most part, I've found a lot of life to be quite challenging, as I think a lot of people do, because there always seems to be those who make the rules and those who follow. And I think for a lot of time, I had just accepted that to be just the way life is, and not only in work environments, but also social environments. And when I started studying mental health in various different ways, um, I started to ask all sorts of questions. And it was when I was in what ended up becoming and progressing into a not terribly nice relationship. I started to do more research into that. And I started to realize that I myself had got remarkably low self-worth myself. And thinking like, how did this happen? And looking back, because when you train in therapy, you have to go through your own therapy.
Hmm.
And you do a lot of reflection. And when you're studying it whilst also learning it, you also get a lot of psychoeducation. So it's a very interesting mix happening at the same time. And it suddenly dawned on me that I had very much been a survivor of coercive controlling behavior and enduring it without even realizing it
Hmm.
because of this acceptance of this is just how things are. This is just the way the world works. And thinking like, I don't think so. It doesn't have to be that. And I think that the studying of therapy and having therapy really opened my eyes to that.
Hmm.
And working with other people who've been through it and going through it, and devising to try to understand what might be the root cause of that.
Hmm.
Where does it actually start, rather than being the regular sound bites you might get on social media, where positive affirmations, which are more like, I don't know, sticky plaster for a broken leg. It
Hmm.
was wanting to find out what is it that's causing that infection? Where does that stem from? Because if you can deal with that, then it has a knock-on effect for everything else.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to write a book that I would have liked to have read a very long time ago.
Hmm. Yeah, just understanding, like, so basically, when you were able to reflect back on your own history, recognizing that you were exposed to patterns of controlling, coercive behavior, which Alex and I were talking before the podcast, and we were saying how a lot of people would commonly refer to some of these as like narcissistic behaviors, but I was saying how I really appreciated that she uses coercive controlling behaviors in the book, and she doesn't even really use the word narcissist throughout the book. And sometimes I do think we get hung up on labels instead of the behaviors themselves and the degree to which we're experiencing them, because everything exists on a spectrum. So it's not about deciding, is this person a narcissist or not? It's like, how do I feel about how they're treating me, and is this kind behavior? So I appreciated that about the book. But then essentially what you're saying is you recognize that maybe some of the treatment you experienced growing up wasn't actually like normal, universal experiences, and that it kind of shaped your self worth. And one thing that I'm curious about, because I feel like we talk about self worth a lot, and obviously it's such a huge piece of a healthy, vibrant life is having self worth. It has such a ripple effect on everything else. But how did you know that you have had low self worth? What provided you the evidence that you had that moment? I have really low self worth. What defined that for you? Because I think a lot of people who have low self worth might not even recognize that they do, if that makes sense. So, what were the defining characteristics of it clicking as a realization that that's what it was?
Gosh, the realization.
You.
It's lots and lots and lots of little things. And like I say, I think it's going through my own personal therapy was kind of looking at it in hindsight a
Mm,
lot
mm,
of everything
mhm,
that was happening because what you're raised with is considered to be your normality, your everydayness.
mhm,
And that becomes almost like a grounding and a foundation of who we are and what we consider to be normal.
mhm,
And also, very often, we end up parenting ourselves the way we've been parented.
mhm,
We internalize that. That our inner parent tends to be taught to us from how we've been parented. And so if we do something wrong, or it's like, how many times have you ever done something like, I don't know, tripped or knocked something over by accident? And it's kind of like, oh, I'm so stupid, or oh, and we get angry at ourselves. And there are other people who don't respond that way. They're very relaxed in the way that they deal with it, and the difference between the two. And we have at some point been taught that it's not okay to cry. It's not okay to get upset. It's not okay to show emotion. It's not okay to talk back. It's not okay to do something accidentally. And if we do that, we get a very negative response, or things gets restricted, or love gets denied, or whatever it may be. And we learn that if we do something wrong, then we get punished for it, but always by somebody whom we hold in authority.
mhm,
And it's interesting when you were mentioning before that I don't mention the word narcissism because coercive controlling behaviours can be done by anyone and everyone. They don't require a diagnosis to use
mhm.
them. And I think there is the danger that we can easily think, oh, well, if they're not a narcissist, it can't be coercive controlling behaviour,
Right.
which is completely untrue. In certain businesses, for example, business practices, it can be encouraged as a means of controlling the staff. Not a healthy way, in my personal opinion, of doing it, but it can be. So it's being able to recognize, exactly as you said, the behavior. And
Mhm.
that came so much more into my awareness when I was studying therapy and going through my personal therapy. And it was a gradual process.
Mm.
And I think that one of the problems when you were saying earlier about empathy is the way it can be weaponized against you,
Mhm.
and the way that somebody who uses coercive controlling behavior relies upon you feeling sorry for them.
Mhm.
And we end up being caught into that trap. And when you start to become increasingly aware that that is actually what's happening, you suddenly start to notice patterns in yourself, in other people. And it was a gradual realization for me
Mm.
that I was feeling very sorry for other people's levels of distress, and by that making excuses for the way in which they dealt with their anger, which was very often taken out on me.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay, they've had a terrible past. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay because they just had a bad day at work.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay, they've had, and we make excuses and justify that person's behaviours rather than thinking, would I treat someone like that?
Yeah.
Do I treat someone like that when I'm angry? I don't
Mm-hmm.
think I do. No, I don't actually. And trying to ask those questions, and then asking also the question of when I'm seeing a person in particular, the way that they treated a friend of mine in exactly the same way, and I immediately rushed to their defence, to my friend's defence, the kind, no, 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 you don't talk to my friend like that, you don't treat them like that. And the friend turned around with me and said, "Good at defending others, aren't you? Never yourself." And then I suddenly thought, "Oh no, I've done it again. I've dated another person who's like this." And so it became more in my awareness as an adult when it was actually happening that I was
Mm-hmm.
repeating a cycle.
Yeah.
And I think this
And
is how empaths get in that cycle.
mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's definitely a few themes that I feel are uh, characteristic of low self-worth is that idea of the harsh inner dialogue, like you mentioned. Um, Also, ending up in toxic relationships where we're accepting behavior for ourselves that we're making excuses before, or putting ourselves as a last priority in terms of treatment,
Yeah,
like prioritizing other people's well-being above our own and comfort level above our own. Yeah, it is so interesting, the gradual process of sort of awakening to your own conditioning and the way that you were programmed, and realizing, how that's shaped you and contributed to your whole way of seeing and interacting with the world. It's
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I know. And speaking of that, one thing that you talk about in the book in terms of just developing your awareness around and curiosity around any behavior coercive controlling behavior that you experience, or just looking into your own past. You talked about really gaining an understanding of your parents' awareness levels and the tools they had, and like what the cultural and societal influences were that shaped them when they were raising us. And so, how can this perspective really help us better understand ourselves and our upbringing? How does this help us even to just heal in general from experiencing coercive controlling behaviors?
I think it's one thing which I do highlight in the book, which I really want to emphasize, is that just because somebody's behavior might be understandable does not make it
Mm-hmm.
acceptable. And the purpose of trying to fix a problem in my mind, you need to be able to understand how it happens.
Right.
Where does it come from? Because it's very difficult. One of the things which is, I think, reliant on us having low self-worth is the belief that there is something wrong with us specifically, and that we're not good enough. There's something that we're doing wrong. If we just change a little bit about ourselves, if we do this, and very often it isn't actually anything to do with us.
Mm.
So the point about trying to understand our parents or significant caregivers, whoever that may be, because sometimes people will live with grandparents or other family members, is to think, what is it that made them the way that they were?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's that parenting style that you're internalizing. And so you're replicating how you treat yourself the way that they treated you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's being able to understand the difference of that and recognize actually that's not you. That was not okay, the way that they treated you. and things could have been done very differently. And trying to be able to separate yourself as an individual from that and recognize that chances are they repeating the cycles that their parents did to them, and so on and so forth, going back. I know people talk a lot on social media at the moment about generational curses. There's no curse about it. It's just a normal process by which
Logic.
the brain,
Yeah.
yeah, the way that the human brain seems to function. You can call it a curse. I can appreciate why, but it's more the case of being able to understand that you are an individual and that it wouldn't have mattered if somebody else had been born to them, that process would have still happened. And
Right.
that, as bizarre as it sounds, it isn't actually that personal. It is actually just the way that that person was.
Yeah.
It is who they were and how they would have treated their second child. That is how they would have treated their first child. That is how they would have treated the second child. Because you do get parents teaching, uh, behaving differently towards different siblings sometimes.
Hmm.
Often, sometimes to try and cause arguments between the two, so that the parent comes in and says, "Oh, I'm such a victim. You're so upsetting me." But can set children up to fight each other, be in competition with one another, and very often, always to compete for the affection of a parent,
Hmm.
because the parent has their own insecurities and their own
Yeah.
self-worth and
Yeah.
lives very much for getting their affection and their needs met through their children's want and need for them. And
Yeah.
so that way you get that kind of very damaging dynamic that can occur.
Hmm.
But important thing to mention and to keep in mind is that that would have happened to any child that had been born to them, and it is not, you are not innately bad, you are not innately at fault.
Yeah, because you talk a lot about how like that treatment early in life shapes our levels of self-worth or lack thereof, which in turn shapes the relationships that we choose to participate in and accept. And so understanding that it's actually not about you and not a personal attack. It's just a projection of their experience, their level of awareness, the way they were raised, and that can kind of help to start bolstering your self worth. And also, I imagine that it allows you to have a more compassion for yourself because you're like, okay, I'm not a piece of shit child,
Yep.
and b maybe more of forgiveness for the situation, just being like that doesn't make it okay, like you said, obviously, which isn't the purpose
Yeah.
of forgiveness anyways, is never to excuse the behavior but just to understand. And it is funny because we do have this experience of, at some point in adulthood, realizing that our parents are just humans too. As you start doing your healing work and working through your stuff, it is like you develop more compassion for challenging like elders in your life, at least like I have, where I'm like, oh, they're just because they're maybe older doesn't necessarily mean that their level of awareness is
Yeah.
accelerating with their age. Like some people are choosing actively to develop their self-awareness and look in the mirror, some people aren't. And so I think
Yeah.
there is a certain age where you're like, oh shit, these are all just people of varying ages, shapes, and sizes figuring out their shit at different times and points in their lives. Like age
Absolutely.
age is a barometer for like lived experience, and the more you have, hopefully the more you're learning and growing. But not everyone is. We're all at different levels of awareness. And so it is kind of an awakening moment in adulthood when you're like, dang, my parents were just people too, figuring it out, having their own basket of traumas and inherited in
Yeah.
shortcomings and experiences as well. So yeah, the understanding helps to deepen the awareness that can reshape what we're trying to address, like our self worth and setting ourselves on new trajectories, which is just, I love that you had put that piece in there. I think it was really insightful.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, so now, okay, another one that you talked about that really stood out to me was you wrote about specifically like the pleasure principle and the ties between the pleasure principle, addiction, and dependency. And can you tell us more about your perspective on that relationship? Just, I work a lot, as I was telling you, with a lot of people around sober curiosity and exploring their relationship to alcohol and how they're using it and maybe
Yep.
using it to cope in unhealthy ways or escape. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on the links there.
I could write a book entirely just based on that. I worked in substance misuse for over 10 years, and that was directly in that kind of service. And it's very interesting when looking at coercive controlling behavior in relationships. And it is very much like the addiction model, because
Mm.
people will always say things like, why do people stay in those relationships? Why do they keep going back? Why do they keep taking that person back? Why do they stay in that job? Why? It doesn't make logical sense.
The self worth?
And exactly, it doesn't. And the thing is, though, that if we are predisposed to um, coercive controlling relationships, it's very often because we were not given the tools growing up that are necessary for having a sense of our own autonomy, self-respect, a sense that we have value, that we have some sense of control and are entitled to have some level of control over our own lives. And I think that with if we're going kind of like through the average process of the id, because that's kind of like what's meant to be our animalistic self,
Yeah,
our
the
roots,
the
our
ego and the
naked,
super ego.
absolutely our naked self,
Yeah.
which has had absolutely no sense whatsoever of control put in and no parameters, no boundaries, nothing. And that's always pleasure seeking, food, warmth, hunger, that takeaway you shouldn't have, whatever it may be. And we have no ability to control that. Growing up, we're basically told you can't have that immediately. And so our immediate gratification, we learn to defer it. We learn for it to be delayed. And as a result of that, we don't punch people when they annoy us. We don't suddenly, ideally, we don't run up and kiss somebody we've just met because we think they're gorgeous. Whatever it may be, we tone it down. We have some sense of self-control of whichever is normal within whatever the cultural norms and legislation is within whichever country you're in. But the difficulty with, I think, coercive controlling behavior, if we're kind of going through the usual stages of love bombing, for example, which is, like I say, again, can be done by anybody and is very often a usual part of most relationships because we want to be liked.
Hmm.
We want to be appreciated, we want to feel good. For somebody who is purposefully using coercive controlling behavior, love bombing is not the I'll do everything nice for you because I want you to like me. It's more of a test.
Yeah.
It's testing the water. It's seeing how you respond to love bombing. Rather like when you get a drug dealer, when they will be terribly nice to you and say, first hit's free. And there's that initial hit, which kind of feels for people that they've never felt that before. They've not had that experience before.
It's like
That's
fishing. You're like
yes,
fishing to see if like you have the right person for
yeah,
you're getting them hooked and whereas a normal person with high self-worth would be like, this is weird. Why are you giving me so much attention? Whereas somebody
yeah,
who has low self-worth is gonna eat it up.
yeah. I've seen something not so long ago where somebody was saying like, if you're starving, hungry in your house and a stranger knocks on your door with a pizza, you're going to take it. But if you've got a full stock of food in your fridge,
You're like suspicious.
yeah, exactly.
Like a healthy
And
minded person would be suspicious and would be like, why are you, it's, and it's funny. I feel like women will do that a lot in relationships too, with where it's like you just, a lot of, I feel, women tend to and this is obviously generalizing, but when
Mm.
women are looking for relationships, it's like easier to look past the red flags and just like, he must just really love me for how amazing
Yeah.
I am that he doesn't even know yet.
And I think this is just the problem is that because there's because of the delayed gratification growing up, of the lack of love, of the lack of
Mm,
affection, of the lack of praise, of the lack of appreciation, whatever it may be, that predisposes you so much to being in those kinds of relationships. And
yeah.
it makes it so that when somebody says all these wonderful things to you or makes you feel good, it's kind of like, it's what I've always wanted. And it is. And there's nothing wrong with you always wanting that. Everybody should have a sense of some other people appreciating you and caring about you. But the problem is that somebody who purposefully wants to misuse that and abuse
Yeah.
that, the love bombing stage is to test how you react to it. Do they react favorably to it? Are they suspicious of it? Do they keep wanting more? And the little tests that people might do. And love bombing doesn't necessarily always have to be the extreme of we could get married tomorrow, or this is a story that we tell our children, or these kinds of things which just sound so overtly romantic that
Mhm.
probably have very little basis in reality at all. Um, is that when you have these scenarios, it can be even in a workplace where it's kind of like, you've done an excellent job, we're going to keep up like this and you'll get a promotion in 6 months' time. You could
Yeah.
be one of the managers inside of a year and all this sort of stuff.
Hmm.
And seeing how people respond to it. And if
Yeah.
they grab hold of it and then they keep working themselves really hard to try and meet the demands to be able to get that promise met,
Hmm.
and then it starts to ease off. And then the person sees like how you react to the withdrawal stage. Are you addicted yet? Just like a drug dealer, where they're kind of like say like, oh, um, sorry, the first one was free.
And then
Now,
it's kind of picking up on your, like, it's hooking you in for that dopamine hit of like seeking for that
yes,
love you didn't receive in the way
yeah,
that you needed or wanted growing
it's
up.
not absolutely. It's like a crack high.
Yeah.
Is that you've never felt that extreme high before. And so when it's taken away, you not only get the chemical low, but you also get the psychological low that comes with it. So if that's your baseline and you kind of go really high, you will come down not only to what you were before, but usually far lower,
Hmm.
significantly lower. The drop off is quite intense. And
Wow.
as a result of that, that keeps you very much thinking like, I cannot be here. Because
Yeah.
if this part already was intolerable or difficult to cope with, anything below that is going to feel very intolerable.
Hmm.
And so you're going to keep chasing, you're going to be wanting to chase back that first hit. And that tends to be what keeps people coming back. Um, I liken in the larger book I've written, I kind of liken this to what the truffle pigs, if you heard of truffle pigs,
Yeah.
where it's the specific pig which is kind of bred to hunt truffles, which are very difficult to find and worth a lot of money.
Hmm.
And one thing that they found was that, of course, the pig finds a truffle, dig it up, and then they take it away, and the pig doesn't get any of it because it's worth an awful lot of money. But they found that if they kept doing that, the pig stopped searching for the truffles. No longer was interested because it wasn't getting what it needed. So it was conditioned away from finding truffles. So what ended up happening was they thought, oh, we need to give it a bit of truffle to keep it interested. And
Hmm.
so they would harvest so many, and then they would have to give the pig the reward of a taste, not a full taste that it would have had, but enough to keep it interested. And that way they maintain the workhorse scenario.
Hmm.
And that seems to apply so much more in the process of addiction, in the process of abusive relationships, um, the unsatisfying places that people find themselves in day jobs. It's the suggestion of and the promise, the piecemeal that you might get. The I've got you this engagement ring that didn't cost very much as a peace offering for the marriage that you want that keeps never happening, for
Yeah.
the promises. And I think that's something which somebody went and asked me not so long ago, what do I think is the most dangerous thing about coercive controlling behavioral relationships of any kind? And I would say hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Breadcrumbing.
Hope. Yeah. The breadcrumbing, the
Giving
hope
people
that is
just
inspired.
enough to like maintain hope, false hope on a projected reality that they have no evidence of, but they're just getting the littlest piece, Hopefully, yes, hope. I that, and you would never think, that, but clinging to that false hope, I
It's not
think,
good.
yeah,
But they give you just enough to make you think. And because you've already got that hook inside of you, that you think to yourself, well, they wouldn't have done that. They wouldn't have done it if they weren't going to do that because
hmm
I wouldn't do it. And this kind of like leans into a bit of sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself and answering your questions before you've asked them, but it kind of leads into it. Is the way in which things which keep people so stuck
yeah,
is when people judge the instigator. I refer to it as the instigator rather than anything else. The instigator of the coercive controlling behaviour as if they are themselves, which is, I
hmm
think, another thing which keeps people stuck in these relationships. Because it's one thing, I think, to try to put yourself in another person's shoes, but I think it's also the part where you start to, how to describe, overly project who you are onto
right.
that person.
It's that is like such a that sentiment I think is so important for people who are empaths because I think a lot of times there is this awakening process with empaths too where you sort of go into the world and you think people care as much as you, or they sort of feel as deeply as you, or they're as invested as you are. You just don't
Yes.
understand that there's any differentiation between the way you are. It's like just subconsciously how you are. And so you just almost have this automatic assumption that other people are the same way. And so I think there is almost so many people who just have that more sensitive, empathic nature go through that awakening process where they recognize that usually through a betrayal or disappointment or being poorly treated, where they realize, holy shit, not everyone is the same as me, and I've been projecting my qualities onto the world around me. But that awareness then allows you to integrate it with awareness as opposed to it subconsciously running the show and assuming everyone's the same way. And then it really becomes a superpower. But when it's when it's beneath awareness, it can definitely run the show in a negative way. The assumption that everyone operates the same way.
Yeah, I think that is one of the biggest problems. And I was listening to some people who are self-aware narcissists because I find it very interesting to hear their perspective.
Whoa, that would be really
And
interesting.
there's a couple of them who have found the perfect venture for a self-aware narcissist, which is to have their own social media accounts. But it's really quite, no, it's really interesting
Yeah.
because from their perspective, one thing that they seem to agree on is the belief that empathy is made up, that it's
Mm.
fictitious, it doesn't exist, because it's not within their field of experience.
Right. So they're
It's not.
projecting their way of thinking onto the world like, oh, that's not real because I don't have it.
Exactly. And so when you get somebody who isn't very empathic or definitely has very much emotions, cares about other people, and they think to themselves, well, I wouldn't do that, so that can't be true.
Right.
And so people end up making up other reasons as to how and why. the person's doing it to help with, and they end up justifying things in their head without checking it out. Oh, it must be because that horrible person at work again, or it must be because they're a terrible parent, or whatever it may be.
Hmm.
And people end up making up excuses for that. But for people who don't have empathy, because it's not just people who've got obviously narcissistic personality disorders, there's a range of people who
Yeah.
have challenges with empathy. Um, and also some people who, how should I put it, can be so, are not narcissistic, but can be so incredibly busy or constantly in crisis, if you like, within their own lives,
But they're
that they
just
are,
like self-absorbed.
yeah, they're in
They,
survival mode.
hmm.
They do have empathy, but that only seems to kick in when they stop and stand still.
Well, that makes sense because if you think about, rest and digest, fight or flight, parasympathetic nervous system,
Yep,
it's so if everything non-essential is shut off in survival mode, empathy doesn't seem like it would make the cut, you know?
absolutely not. Because there's nothing more dangerous than a wounded animal stuck in a corner. It's kind of, and if
Yeah, you're
people are
like, oh,
constantly,
yeah,
absolutely, and if
yeah.
people are constantly feeling that way, you're always going to be on the defensive. You're always going to be looking for something that's going to be picking on you. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the person doesn't empathize or can't. It can just mean that the situation that they're in is that they're hypervigilant.
They don't have the bandwidth to care much about other people. Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting too. I was even thinking, this is kind of backtracking a little bit, but I was thinking about the coercive controlling behavior in the work setting
Mm.
and how it's so fascinating too, how it creates a culture where healthy communication is you're the outlier. It is so interesting how, and I'm sure you recognize that as a therapist and just working in mental health, even a dysfunctional family unit, like the black sheep of the family is usually the one that will speak up and be like, what
Yep.
is going on here? Or like, this isn't right. And so it is quite fascinating to me how dysfunction, like within a group, can make the healthy minded person the dysfunctional one.
Yeah.
And I
They don't
did
fit.
Yeah, it happens in corporate settings as well. People like toxic positivity or just very performative cultures, or if you say even in the world, it's like when there's conditioning that people are really following or things people are super energized about or activated, whether it's because of the news or current events or whatever. If you speak anything against like a counter narrative, like asking questions, you're like, yeah, but that doesn't make sense. People will just, it's like not allowed, to
Yeah.
speak anything outside of like the accepted narratives, whether that's societally, like in a dysfunctional family unit, in a dysfunctional corporate setting, even though outside of that it would clearly be common sense or obvious like, integrity, or it's just that kind of
Yeah.
phenomenon is really of groupthink is
That's what I was
really
thinking. Yeah.
is really interesting to me. It's something I've been paying attention to a lot throughout my sobriety, just noticing more group dynamics and how you can really be made to feel like the outlier if you're in a toxic setting where you no longer want to participate in the toxicity, the delusion, the illusion, or accept what everyone else is accepting. It's not.
Absolutely.
It's not for the meek.
That's just the problem is that the ideal is always meant to be, I am who I am, you are who you are, and that's fine. We
Hmm.
can be individuals, we can be ourselves. I've got in my friendship group, there are various ages, various heritages, religions, um, various different approaches and beliefs on things. But
Yeah.
we seem to all have the same basic code of morals, ethics, and values.
Yeah.
And just so, despite our major differences, the core underlining premise of who we actually are as people, if you strip away all of the superfluous stuff. At our roots, we're kind of very similar in that basis, which is sufficient. And I think that the problem is that when you have in group situations, because when people are giving up alcohol or drugs or whatever it may be, I mean, if we say alcohol, because that's considered to be generally socially acceptable.
Hmm.
If you go to a bar or pub, whatever it may be, and everybody else is getting drunk, and the only way that you're considered to be accepted in the discussion is if you're also having a drink, that seems very odd to me that other people would find it uncomfortable for them to drink and you not to.
Yeah,
I always find that very strange because if you are being yourselves and it's perfectly fine and you're welcome, it shouldn't matter.
right.
It shouldn't matter. But what you do tend to find a lot of the time is like, oh, just the one won't hurt you.
Yeah.
Oh, just have one drink. Oh, look, I'll pay for it myself. You don't have to worry. Oh, it's okay. I'll pay for you to get home, okay? And all of these favors that they're suddenly willing to do that they would probably never have done before,
Yeah.
just to
It's
get you to have a drink.
It is really enlightening when you choose to step back from behaviors that were like the accepted in a group, and then you
Mm.
recognize, is it just that I'm aligning my behaviors with yours, or is it that we are actually in alignment? And I
Yes.
think the thing is that you don't have to have aligned behaviors to be in alignment with someone, just like you said, like you can be completely different people, but your underpinning values are in alignment. And
Yes.
maybe one of those is to let others exist in their individuality as long as they're
Yeah.
not hurting anyone, you know? And so I think it is interesting to notice because even for me, when I stopped drinking, I definitely had relationships where it felt really weird when other people were drinking and I wasn't, and then I had relationships where it felt completely fine and it didn't, it was like a non-issue. And so it's definitely both ways. It goes both ways. I think reflecting back, part of it was probably me feeling uncomfortable as well, just depending on the relationship in question. But also, yeah, people do get attached to old versions of you and your behavior validating their own behavior. And again, it
Yes.
circles back to self worth because if somebody
Yep.
is completely confident in themselves, their self worth, their choice to drink or not drink, whatever the case may be, they're not going to care what you're doing. But somebody who
Absolutely.
has low self worth is going to be much more attached to your behavior validating theirs. And so it's
Yes.
a process to understand that as you change and you again, like the understanding of our parents' awareness is like understanding different people's level of awareness and
Yeah.
what their behaviors reveal about their own insecurities is it was a process for me not to take things personally. Even just today I did a post that was talking about the analogy of, being in a room of drunk people if you're sober. And I'm talking like being not just people drinking, like being
Mm.
surrounded by people who are intoxicated feels really similar sometimes to like going through a spiritual awakening because you feel just out of step with the people around you or you're experiencing different realities, and you can say a million times on social media like this isn't coming from a space of judgment, I'm just sharing like an analogy. And I had multiple people say like, oh, you think you're better than everyone, like I literally said I didn't, but people take things through their own lens,
Yeah.
whatever that may be, and you can't control that. You can only control, your choices and intention and cultivating your own self-worth so that other people's responses to it aren't going to define you.
Absolutely. And I suppose the thing is that what is wrong with going into a bar with a group of friends, some people not drinking, some people drinking,
Mm-hmm.
and just enjoying each other's company?
Yeah.
Because unless what you're there for is to get drunk, which is if that's a person's way of letting off steam or at the end of the week or something like that, that's fine. That's their choice to do so. But to demand, if you like, to place demands on another person that you must do the same if you're in my company when you don't want to, that doesn't quite scan to me.
Yeah.
Because if one person's way of thinking, like, no, I'd rather buy a very large amount of quantity of chocolate and just have my favorite pig out, that's kind of like my favorite pig, thank you. And it's like people don't seem to want to relate to that. Oh, it's not the same. And you're just thinking, like, well, maybe mine's not as also an unhealthy coping mechanism, but it is different, but it's a similar principle. But the way you talk about people wanting to justify their own behaviors by getting other people to join in is another interesting dynamic because it's also very coercive.
Controlling
It's almost
behavior. Yeah.
absolutely because it's almost like if you don't join in, you're not one of us. If
Right.
you don't join in, you're not one of the group. If
Yeah.
you don't partake, then you don't belong. And I know a lot of people over the years who've told me about how they thought their friendship group wouldn't change. And it did, slowly but surely, some quite immediately, but other times it's kind of they said when spending some time with people whom they knew, this is in severe substance misuse, by the way, um, they
Yeah.
found that they had very little to say, and they found that they didn't really know each other, and about how their friendship was pretty much all based around the substance misuse,
Yeah.
and that getting to know the people whom they had socialized with were literally just drinking buddies rather than genuine friends.
Yeah.
And that really broke the heart of so many people,
Hmm.
including partners that they were in relationships with.
Yeah.
And but the level of, I mean, I think one of the biggest problems, I mean, we're veering slightly away from coercive controlling behavior, but not really,
We'll be
is that
looping
somebody,
back.
but it's a similar process, is that
Yeah.
when you give something up, it requires other people to support your change. It requires other people to do things differently around you.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the biggest problems that a lot of people have, whether it's coming out of addiction of any kind, whether that's substance misuse or the addictive nature to coercive relationships. So
Right.
many times with situations whereby um, the person may be coercive and controlling towards you, but your friends are in love with that person, or your family's in love with that person. And it's not unusual sometimes, and I've heard people say this quite a few times, that it's come to a family event or something, and they know that that person may have split up with the controlling person, or they're no longer in the friendship group. And the family's invited them to the family event
Oh,
because
yeah.
they're so nice to them. And it's almost as if they are suddenly favoured over you.
Hmm.
And the way in which that can end up happening, and you suddenly become the outsider. And they kind of go, oh, you know what you were like as a child. It's not their fault. And you can find that the coercive parent that you had ends
I
up
was gonna
siding with the
say.
coercive partner.
Yeah, I was just
And
gonna say.
it's
That's
the
so
suddenly
funny.
you've got it in surround sound. It's like you're kind of thinking
Yeah.
about God. And
Yeah, and you're again feeling like the
yes,
healthy one is the unhealthy one because you're in the pool of toxicity. And I was laughing because I'm like, yeah, of course the
yeah,
dominating parent would be like, let's invite the
yeah,
person I groomed you to choose.
yes.
This
It's
toxic
that is
relationship.
exactly, this is the extension of myself. I
Yeah.
get along with them so well. It's almost like I was people talking to people before about red flags, and saying that if you've identified you've got a really coercive, controlling parent, and you find your coercive, controlling parent suddenly absolutely adores a partner whom you have,
Red flag.
that's so much of a red flag. It's a carnival. It's kind of like really reconsider whether or not
Yeah,
that is actually a good move.
I know.
Because if they say like, oh, I really relate to them, I really understand them, and you're just thinking like, that's not really not necessarily a good thing. So
Yeah, you're like
definitely,
not the
definitely switch.
endorsement that you think it is.
Absolutely.
One thing that you were talking about too, which really caught my eye, was interoception, because I talk to a lot of people about familiarizing themselves with, the feelings and
Mm.
sensations of their body and just the communication of what their body is trying to tell them, whether it's, am I feeling repelled by this? Am I feeling attracted to this? Am I feeling stress in my body? What is your body trying to tell you? And understanding that language is so important. And as you know, having worked in substance misuse for so long, really understanding that is helpful in sort of severing our ties to substances, because we can start to tune in. Oh, I'm starting to feel stressed out. This is when I would normally be triggered. What can I do differently? How do I connect to calm in my body without alcohol? All of that type of relationship that we cultivate with our physiological um, expressions. And so you had said something I thought was really interesting, which is how important it is when it comes to boundary setting. And so that body awareness is an important part in creating healthy boundaries. And so, why is learning to understand discomfort and recognize it in our bodies such an important part of boundary setting?
Well, the interesting part about that is that to try to separate the physical from the mental, emotional, you can't really do. And this has been something which has been spoken about now for decades. Um, and there's a massive interplay between the two, absolutely massive. There's lots of evidence these days to say about how much stress, just psychological stress, can cause your body to become physically unwell.
Mm-hmm.
And people talk a lot about psychosomaticism. Psychosomaticism, I hope I'm saying that properly. It's one of those words which you find difficult to say.
Yeah, I'm like, it sounded
And
good.
it's like practicing. Um, is that some people think like, oh, it's psychosomatic, so they're putting it on. No, that's something very different. To somatize is that you experience real physical symptoms, but there is
From
no
your
medical,
thought, originating from your thought patterns.
yeah, but there is no medical cause that can be found.
Mm-hmm.
So it's well known that people can induce heart attacks from stress. So you could quite literally die from it. There's the oh, what is it now? Is it called the something heart, where a person can actually quite literally die from emotional grief of a loss of a
Mm.
loved one?
Oh yeah, I've
Uh,
heard when people like die
yeah,
almost right after their partner dies and stuff like that.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So it can have very real physical effects, but there is no heart disease. There's no genetic condition that's predisposing them. So it's very important to recognize that. Plus the fact that there's been research done, gosh, back in the when it was it, the 60s, that showed that when a person is happy, they produce more white blood cells.
Mm-hmm.
Genuinely happy. You can't just mock laugh and think that's going to make you feel good. That just doesn't work. But it's the concept of genuinely feeling happy. You can't separate the two. And I think that sometimes our body tends to speak to us very loudly to try and say, we are in distress. And I think this is also very prevalent for people who are neurodiverse too,
Mm-hmm.
because in order to recognize when we need to impose boundaries, we need to recognize when we're in distress.
Mm-hmm.
And I know from my own journey was that I would get ill quite a lot, and I couldn't understand why would be getting ill. And it was often connected to a lot of emotional distress and finding out that, very interesting. It's almost like your body's trying to make an executive decision to remove you from the circumstances which you're experiencing. It's
Yeah.
not unusual for people who are going a lot of stress at work to become ill more frequently and take time off. It actually seems to be remarkably common.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not necessarily like, oh, they're faking it not to go in. It's just quite literally that the body's thinking, we are going to remove ourselves from this situation.
Hmm.
So in the book, I talk about going through a body check. And I've used this with people whom I work with who are neurodiverse because obviously the difficulty of understanding and processing emotion and being aware of it and actually understanding sometimes what different emotions are. So it kind of works, should technically work for everybody. Um, is that if you're feeling a sense of discomfort when you have a circumstance that's coming up, or a conversation you're having, or if you think like, oh, I've got to go home for the holidays, and all of a sudden you start to feel unwell. You start to think your body's trying to tell you something. It just says, we do not want to go. Why is that? It's being able to do that body check. So you're trying to look at what is happening on for you internally, what's happening for you physically, how is your heart feeling? How is your chest feeling? Is it feeling restricted? Is it feeling tight? Bearing in mind, assuming it isn't an asthma attack, though illnesses can be triggered like psoriasis, asthma,
Yeah.
skin breaks out, all sorts of things that are very highly stress related. A good barometer, if you like, because as I'm sure you are more than aware of, I know that you are very much the expert on this. So doing the body check and trying to ask yourself, what is going on for me physically? How am I feeling internally? Am I feeling hot? Am I feeling sweaty? Am I feeling jittery? Am I feeling nauseous? What is happening inside my body? And seeing if, like, how relaxed am I? Where is my tension in my body? Where am I feeling tense? And often it's kind of like, are my shoulders tight? Is my neck
Yeah.
tight? I'm grinding my teeth. It's like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And trying to think to yourself about what is it that's happening that's making me feel that way. It should be a pause for thought to recognize I'm in distress. What is causing that? And gives you the opportunity to step away and try to analyze this particular side of me. What is happening and what is causing it? And by identifying it, then it gives you a raising of awareness to look at what can you do about it.
Right.
Because if you're not
Yeah.
aware, then you can't do anything about it and it will continue.
Yeah, and it just develops that, bi-directional communication between ourselves and our thoughts and our perceptions and the physical
Hmm,
experience we're having in our body, recognizing, hey, you don't have to power through and override discomfort. Instead, you can get curious about it, see what it's trying to communicate to you, and then act accordingly. And
absolutely.
I feel like I've had many relationships in my life where it was just almost habitual, and you have relationships you carry from childhood, and you're like, we've always been friends. It's like, but how are you feeling when you're around that person? And you kind of go into autopilot mode in a lot of life, relationships included. And so
Mm,
it's just really a nice opportunity to connect to the wisdom of your body, but then to also take inventory about, oh, I notice I feel actually really great in these relationships and not so great when my body doesn't feel so great when I spend time with these people. And like you said, why is that? And what can I do about it? Maybe lessen my time. Maybe I don't share as much personal stuff with this particular person. Like, boundaries don't always have to be like you're out or you're in. It can be,
yes,
how much of myself do I offer to these different relationships and using my discernment accordingly. Because, yeah, that was another thing that was like a learning curve to me, was just granting everyone like full access to my life and then realizing, okay, it's the all or nothing thinking came in hot.
absolutely.
Like, okay, you're out of here. You can stay. And like that, that gung ho like initiation into the healing journey where you're just like, you're in, you're out. And now as I've, been working through my sobriety for 6 years and like my own healing and just watching clients' journeys, you kind of soften into like, okay, I love this quote actually. I think it's by Jaya John was the name, but it says, our boundaries need not be an electric fence that shock those who touch it. It can just be a gentle light that says, this is how I'll be
Yeah.
treated. And I think in the beginning, I was way more rigid with my boundaries. And then as I developed my sense of self-worth, I realized like I know what level of access I'm giving people. I don't have to announce it. It doesn't have to be a
Yep.
big thing. I can just
Yep.
trust that I offer to my relationships what I've discerned they deserve and the level of access to me that they should get. And so that's been an interesting process too, but a huge part of it was I realized for a long time I was ignoring my intuition around different relationships and energy that I felt from them and how I felt afterwards. And
Mm.
um, once I stopped doing that and started getting more curious, I was like, well, why do you keep forcing these? you know?
Absolutely. And
So,
it's an amazing journey that you've been on because it's kind of like it's when you're when you're changing things up, people will have very interesting reactions to
mm-hmm,
you. They'll
mm-hmm,
either there's those who are just very nonchalant and just don't seem to notice anything. And then there are those who can react quite violently to it because they don't like the way that you might be changing, because therefore it feels suddenly that they've lost the person who might look after them, so
mm-hmm,
that they can't be the one that's always looked after, so that they have to take on board some responsibility for themselves, which is
mm-hmm,
a lot of thing which a lot of people don't want to do because they want you to be responsible for them.
mm-hmm.
They might think like, oh, you're not fun anymore. You're not the person that you used to be. You used to be so funny. So it's almost like it's you become more you and more yourself rather than the people pleaser.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting in therapy when you're training in it and you're having it at the same time, so you've got that double whammy. Um, it actually helps you to understand more about what therapists are trying to do as well, which
Mm-hmm,
is really helpful.
mm-hmm,
But it's when you're talking about making changes, and exactly what you're saying is that it doesn't have to be that black and white. It doesn't have to be that all or nothing. And sometimes when I've been working with people, it was trying to look at the whole situation about what they found. They're like, oh, it's just too much. I just get rid of the person. I'm like, well, you don't have to do all of that. You can just try to make a small manageable change just to see how that works. Because if you're looking at Gestalt therapy, where it's kind of like the whole's greater sum of its parts, or AKA the domino effect, is just by changing one tiny little thing, which is knocking over one domino, it can cause a massive chain reaction that can change
mm-hmm.
so many things. Which is why when you're working with people and doing things, certainly for myself, was um, trying to find the path of least resistance. What is the one most manageable thing that we can do that you can maintain that might just go underneath the wire a little bit so as to
Yeah.
not cause too much ruption within the social cohesion that you can do differently that is going to make you feel a bit better about you and isn't going to be necessarily that noticeable to everybody else.
Yeah.
So finding that path of least resistance, what is it that we can work on, which is going to be very different for different people, but it's
Yeah.
going to be manageable, it's going to be achievable, it's going to be realistic. Because there's no point in saying to somebody, what are you going to do differently? And it might be, I'm kicking them out tomorrow, they're leaving. I'm cutting off my family forever and I'm never seeing them again. I'm giving up um, drinking ever cold turkey. I think that could be quite dangerous, actually, doing that.
Yeah.
Um, so it's like trying to find tiny, small, manageable changes because I think if you try to change too much, too quickly, too soon, too drastically,
Yeah.
you are less likely to maintain it. And this
Mm-hmm.
is when things like relapse occurs, which is also true coercive controlling behavior, is people think like they're gone, I'm never having them back. And then it's kind of like the crash, the emotional crash again, the void that suddenly comes through. It's like, I have to have them back. And they text and it's just kind of like, come back, please. And or it's kind of oh, I'm feeling really depressed, or even I'm feeling really happy. I want to go and celebrate.
Yeah.
And that our boundaries are low for whatever reason, whether it's a positive or a negative situation. oh, it's blah blah blah's birthday. We're all going. Are you coming?
Mm-hmm.
What can you do? So it's about finding those tiny things gradually, which are more likely to give you more confidence once those are settled,
Yeah.
and then you can add another one, and so on and so forth, and gradually ease yourself away from things, which is going to be easier to manage, bite-sized chunks, easier to manage, easier to maintain, and less you're less likely to end up going into a massive
Yeah.
relapse.
Well, and I think the healing journey, despite how abruptly we sometimes want to tackle it in the beginning, it
Yeah,
is inevitably a slow
yeah.
process over time where we can make it a little easier on ourselves by doing micro shifts. And the other thing I noticed is obviously the beginning of working on yourself and your healing journey, you are in kind of a fragile state. You are in a
Mm,
space where maybe you have low self-worth, and maybe making a huge amount of decisions from that space is just like wait it out a little because your
yeah.
perspective and your experience of it all like changes so much as you do develop your self-worth. One thing I've noticed is, as I've developed community that's more aligned and just deepened my self trust and confidence in who I am now. Like, I do have so much more tolerance for different relationships that maybe in the beginning I was like, I don't want to be around you anymore. And now I'm like, I could hang out with that person and just like kind of laugh. And it could be a more lighthearted, nonchalant, like peripheral relationship. But I just, in the beginning, you can be really cutthroat with the changes you're making. And it's like you're not going to feel this way that you feel in the initial stages of healing forever. So
Mm.
just knowing that and maybe just moving more subtly with your shifts and changes and decisions about who comes and who goes. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I know that for myself is that one of the things which it's interesting trying to talk a lot more about yourself because one of the things which for me was very strongly conditioned into us when you
with
trained in
therapists,
therapy.
yeah.
You don't talk about yourself, you don't
Yeah.
self-disclose. And so it's interesting talking about this and trying to think to myself, it's actually okay to self-disclose at this point because it's
Yeah.
kind of like half the point why you wrote the book. Is that when for me a lot of it's about my journey is definitely noticing about the red flags
Hmm.
and because that's kind of obviously the red flag. It's kind of like, hello, it's happening. This is where you do something different,
Right.
as opposed to before.
Don't forge ahead with the same tired shit you've always done. Checkpoint.
Absolutely. And it's always feels like going against the grain
Yeah.
because,
Resistance, it does. Because you're like resisting a natural tendency you always have had. So it should
yeah,
feel a little bit like friction, even though it's good.
yeah, where you're trying so hard to distinguish between a red flag and somebody being genuinely in need. And that's coming back to the phrase of something which I have been saying for years. No, it's so terrible, isn't it, when you have to apply your own work to yourself? Where you're thinking like, do what you can to help others, but not in spite of yourself.
Hmm.
And that's basically thinking like, not trying to live your life as a martyr.
Right.
And thinking to yourself like I must go without so somebody else can feed. And it's kind of like what's the reality there? Do you actually have to do that?
Right.
And um you don't have to be the savior. You don't have to have this savior complex of like if you don't do this then you're a horrible person.
Yeah.
Good people can say no. You can be a kind person and have limits.
And
um
sometimes there's kindness in that because when we overextend for people, we might be interrupting their lessons
Absolutely.
and
Because
abandoning ourselves in the process so no one wins.
absolutely. Because it's very interesting when you're looking at the drama triangle. I know lots of people have used it and called it many different things. I know it as a drama triangle, where
Hmm.
you've got the persecutor, the rescuer, and the victim.
Hmm.
And in order for somebody to remain a victim, they have to be always looking for somebody else to either rescue them from their situation or somebody is trying to keep them in their situation. And rescuing, I think, there's a difference, I think, between rescuing and giving someone a helping hand.
Hmm.
Because there's a difference, I think, between doing something for somebody that they can do for themselves.
Right.
That is what I think of as being like the
The
rescuer,
rescuer,
where
enabler.
someone, yes, exactly, where somebody is doing something on your behalf, but technically you could do it yourself. And that, in my mind, is the very negative side of rescuing.
Yeah.
Whereas, for example, therapy and support is best described as being like,
A
you're,
bridge.
yeah, you're driving the car, I've just got the map. Because you
Yeah.
can't do both at the moment with everything you've got on. So, you
Yeah.
know, I'm
Doing
I'm
it.
I'm holding the map and you drive and I'll tell you where to go. It's a
Yeah.
joint effort. It's two people supporting each other to get somewhere.
Yeah. I,
And yeah,
sorry.
sorry,
No,
go
go
on.
ahead.
That's
I
okay, you
was just gonna
first.
say, I had a mentor and a boss who used to tell me never work harder than the client. And I feel like it's such good advice because even in our own relationships too, it's like we can want more for someone else than they are wanting or ready to actually obtain themselves. And maybe they
Mm,
even want it, but they're just not ready to take action. And so, and I
absolutely.
see that in family a lot, you know, where you have a family member who's struggling and you want to help them, but it's ultimately even discerning where someone else is at and if helping them is depleting you and they're not actually like capitalizing on that help, then
Mm,
that's a lose lose. And so it's like every situation can be a little different where it's like I'll be willing to extend myself if someone's going to meet you halfway or actually is like grateful for the help and is going to be like thank you, I'm going to do something with this help rather than I'm preventing you from maybe reaching a rock bottom you need to reach so that you can change. Sometimes we can keep people hovering right above a
mm.
rock bottom that would actually catalyze transformation, and we're interrupting their journey and unfolding by trying to do too much for them. And I always think too how, you know, with motivational interviewing and how it's like humans really have a drive to want to find their own answers. And so even
Mm.
if you have the answer and it's a good one and it's what they 115% should do, if you tell them, like there's almost this instinctive drive to resist just because it's like they're not having the autonomy of like receiving figuring out their own answer to their own problems. And so you can almost prolong somebody, like well intentioned, you know, in doing so, but you can almost prolong someone from getting where they need to go by thinking that you're going to save them. And you know, like parents doing it with adult kids and stuff, where they're like,
Mm.
well, it's like, no, you're enabling them because they need to get out there and learn how to fail and learn, you know, the world is not going to cater to adult children in the same way like an enabling parent would. So it's almost like you're clipping their wings, you know?
That codependency.
Yeah.
And it's interesting when people try to understand what codependency is. I mean, I understand it from the transactional analysis perspective
Hmm.
of where you've kind of got, we've all got the parent and the adult and the child within us. And that the codependent situation is where somebody else becomes your parent and adult and they remain and the other person remains the child. And so rather than two separate people, they become almost one person.
Yeah.
And the person is, and it just becomes they can't think for themselves, and there's this self-learned helplessness because of that.
Yes.
and they can't, it's almost like they are always the child and they can't think for themselves or impose their own boundaries, so they end up having other people impose those boundaries for them.
Hmm.
And so you can end up having the cycle of abuse that way, where it's toxic almost on both sides,
Right.
which is very unhealthy relationship, which is why coercive controlling behavior can also be two ways.
Hmm.
And so these are much more complex situations, obviously, than what a lot of people tend to touch on, because narcissism is so easy. But
Yeah.
it's so much more complicated
It
than
is.
that.
It's
It's
so
so much more in depth.
It is wild how like dysfunctional relationships like feed they fuel the dysfunction in the other, you know?
Yep.
It is really fascinating. I'm like, this is why I watch reality TV.
I confess I avoid that like the plague. I'm sorry.
You don't need to confess avoiding reality TV. That's like good. I'm confessing. I like to psychoanalyze these crazy bitches. No, I'm just kidding. But yes, oh my God, so fun chatting about all this stuff. Okay, so I'll have to wrap up in like 10 minutes. So
Oh
I
wow, I
have
didn't know we've been
to
talking that long.
I know, can you believe it? It's already it
Oh my
feels I
goodness.
was like we only have, an hour and 45 minutes. Now I'm like, "Oh God, it's like actually
That's
getting
gone
close
so
to time."
quickly.
I know it does. Really, like, love talking. I could talk about this type of stuff all day. Relationship dynamics and dysfunction and self-worth is one of my favorite topics. And so, okay, actually, speaking of self-worth is in codependence and emotional dependence. So, how can people begin shifting their sense of self-worth? Because you talked a lot about, like, how self-worth is in codependency is externally generated, right? When we're and as a result of coercive controlling behaviors, oftentimes we do get our self-worth externally sourced, which is what sets us up to be taken advantage of. So how do we shift that from an externally generated source to generating our own self-worth from within? What would you say is the roadmap to that shift?
Ideally, the book I've written,
Yeah.
because it kind of takes you on the process. The way it's written, and it's written slightly different ways to, I think, a lot of books, is that it takes you on a, if you like, the kind of pathway that I've had, and I've also taken clients whom I've worked with down this path as well. And it seems to actually have worked. Because I think it's one thing to go through your own recovery and thinking like, yeah, this works for me. Yes.
Hmm.
And that's fantastic. But there's always the question of, just because it worked for me, is it going to work for other people? And so very much working with that. And I've worked with it with people of various different circumstances, very different ages. And I say, like, a lot of it's going through psychoeducation, which I find out it's extremely helpful for people who are, for example, have neurodiversity, because they are extremely prone, because of the literal thinking,
Hmm.
extremely prone to coercive controlling behavior and relationship.
Mm.
And as we say, therapy, we don't give people the answers, whereas people with neurodiversity require that, because the knowledge base just isn't there. The usual links that average people would make um, not present. Everything's compartmentalized
Mhm.
and needs to be kind of brought together. So there's a lot in there about psychoeducation, and also for people who just don't know or isn't within their awareness because they're so busy. They've, certainly my situation, didn't even realize I was, because it was the norm. So
Mhm.
it's all about awareness raising. And it kind of takes you through some of the subjects we've spoken about, like our upbringing, and trying to think about how it was the way that it was, why it was. And it comes then with a personal reflection of that, about trying to see how that information relates to you in your own life, and trying to relate it into the here and now. It starts to go through how things were growing up, about friendships, about how we value ourselves, and all these various reflection points where it's almost like information and then a sense of almost journaling your own.
Integrating.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're kind of going through that process of the psychoeducation and the awareness and relating that to yourself and seeing how it relates to you,
Yeah.
bringing that awareness into your brain so that that way you can have that realization and think to yourself, okay, something to do
Yeah.
differently.
Yeah.
And as you're kind of going through the book, it starts to get, once it's kind of like brought you up to roughly about what it is adult age, it then asks you to start to do things differently.
Hmm.
And there's different exercises to try and learn how to impose boundaries and what actually is self-worth. How do you define what self-worth is? And it kind of looks at what value is. It looks at what boundaries are. It looks at what self-respect is.
Yeah.
Because respect isn't fear. And I think a lot of people say, like, oh, you don't respect me. And what they're saying is, you don't fear me. Because
Hmm.
fear, I think, is the foundation for um, so many bad things in this world. And it promotes insecurity.
Yeah. Yeah.
It leaches into our own sense of
There
fear.
is like overarching like fear used like I feel like to control the whole freaking planet. It's
Absolutely.
just woven into like the fabric of our societies, and fear, fear,
Absolutely.
fear feeds control, you know? And that makes sense, you know,
Absolutely.
fear is the basis of control.
Absolutely. And that's what they want to inspire is your own insecurities. So a lot of it is trying to get people to separate out what is actually, how should I put it, learned or imposed on you growing up. So you can separate yourself out from what is past, what is other people, and recognize who you are as a person. And
Right.
by doing that, to be able to gain a sense of identifying what is self-respect, how to put in boundaries, and it comes to as it comes towards the end part, once you've kind of gone through the awareness and psychoeducation towards about a third of the way through, it starts to come with all of the ways in which you can put in boundaries and the basis for that.
Yeah.
And in the larger book, which I've just finished writing, that one goes into it even further with even more ways of putting in boundaries and the ways of stopping things, recognizing of the red flags.
Yeah.
And the body check, for example, is the first way to be one of the many ways in which you can identify a red flag. Something's not right. Then it's moving on to what can I do to try and stop this from progressing? How can I do things differently?
Hmm.
And so it's asking you to almost create your own action plan, if you
Right.
like, your own wellness plan for how that you can do things differently.
Hmm.
And like I say, it's finding the path of least resistance, finding what is the one tiniest thing that you could feasibly change that's going to be specific. One specific thing doesn't have to be the world, as you say, just try one thing, which is helps, I think, for people when they're particularly fearful, when
Yeah.
they're particularly anxious.
Or overwhelmed, you know. It can be like a
Absolutely.
lot where you're like, holy shit, like my whole life I have to address all of this, especially in, you know, sobriety as well. Like the parallel there is really
100%.
overwhelming because the far-reaching effects of taking, you know, alcohol out of your life, it can feel really daunting. And so, yeah, the specificity is really important to be like, you only have to take one step at a time. That's how you
Yes,
got here, and that's how you get out of here, you know, in a different trajectory.
100%. And that also feeds into self-worth, is being patient with yourself,
Yes,
learning to be
and
kind to yourself, and
hmm.
being able to, it's like the concept of being your own best friend.
Yeah,
And people would often say that phrase, be your own best friend. And I don't think people really talk about it enough because a lot of what it is that, like with my friend, is that I wouldn't let someone else talk to them like that or treat them that way. And it's like treating that, how you treat that person. If your best friend who meets the world to you is sick or ill or sad or going through whatever it is that they're going through, how do you treat them? What do you do for them? And sometimes I think that if people feel unworthy of self love or self worth, is trying to externalize it sometimes can help.
Yeah.
by giving it a middle ground, because sometimes owning it in one go is too much.
Yeah.
It's like
Hard
no,
to
it's like
direct
I'm not
in.
worthy of it. I don't, and it's that's I'm not that good a person. Doing those one tiny things, saying like, what would you do to try and have your friend feel better? What would you do? And it's like, well, I do X, Y, Z. And it's going like, okay, what's one tiny thing out of all of that list that you would do for that other friend? What would you do out of that that could you do for you? What would
Yeah.
feel digestible? That's not going
Right.
to make you think, oh no, I couldn't do all of that for me. What is that one thing you could do for yourself? And
Yeah.
see how that goes. And just like, as we're saying, it's like that gradual process. There's
Yeah.
things about all of the boundary settings that you can put in place with other people, and it's about building yourself up in a gentle way
Hmm.
rather than trying to force a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah. And the other thing too is when you're working on self-worth and self-trust and you bite off more than you can chew, it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy because you're like, "Oh, see, like I can, or whatever."
Yeah.
Whereas when you build your self-worth brick by brick by making those little wins that amount to significant improvements in self-worth over time, rather than this like defeating narrative that's like reinforcing itself that you can't succeed or you can't change. It just kind of fuels more feelings of inadequacy rather than it's like,
Yes.
hey, just get a little win, get that confidence, keep the promises you make to yourself. And slowly over time, you start to develop that self trust and confidence and worthiness because you're following through.
And that absolutely links back to, I think, what we were saying before about how I think of therapy as being, which can be a skills-based thing, or it can be psychoeducation, or it can be what is needed for the individual. But I always think of it as being very much like what physiotherapy is. You go in, you have an assessment, and you have the session with the physiotherapist, and then you have to go home and do the exercises like 3 times a day or 4 times a day or whatever
Yeah.
it is that's agreed every single day until the next time that you meet. And there's a reason for that. It's you are strengthening a muscle, you are building something up back to what it should be. And
Yes.
so true with therapy is that you're learning to do things differently in exactly the same way. You come in, you have an assessment, you have an agreed plan of action about what's going to happen. You have your session where you talk about things, you agree actions. People call it homework. I hated it called that.
Yeah.
Call it something else, whatever you want to call it. Call it, what is it? I
Self
like to
love
call it
practice.
a doggy bag. I like to call it a doggy bag. It's you're taking home the precious things that you
Hmm.
couldn't fully digest in that particular meal sitting, and you're taking home your doggy bag, and you will be enjoying those treats every single day going forward until the next time when you get another doggy bag. And it's
I like
trying
that.
to build that emotion. It's trying to build that muscle where you're learning a new skill, like driving a car. When
Yeah.
you're learning to drive a car, there's so many things you have to keep your eyes on all at the same time. I remember the trauma of it.
But it eventually
Um,
becomes automatic. Yes. That's a
exactly.
good analogy because it's so true. And I think I always remember one client, we were talking about discernment, and I was saying it varies situation to situation. It's an active engagement with your life and measuring your choices against your integrity, what's in alignment with your highest self, situation by
Yep.
situation. And she's like, that sounds like a lot of work. And we just laugh together. I'm like, well, it is a lot of work, but it's the same thing. Like you get used to operating with that level of
Yeah.
attention and awareness, and it eventually becomes second nature. And you couldn't imagine settling for just like, you know, accepting whatever comes your way. So it's like what was familiar becomes foreign, and what was
Yes.
foreign becomes second nature.
Absolutely. It feels really odd for a while, artificial, clunky,
Yeah.
unnatural. But that's like the case when you were learning to walk, before we learned to walk, and that we didn't exactly do it with
Yeah.
all the grace of a prima ballerina. It was kind of like fall over, feet sticking out, knees are
Yeah.
probably bent outwards. It didn't look terribly elegant or graceful.
Yeah.
But that's the learning phase until the muscles are developed. balance is all as it should be. It's
Mhm.
something that's kind of changing your world, changing your perspective, and you're doing something that you've not done before.
Yeah.
And it's going to take time. It's going to take repetition because that's how we learn any new skill is by repetition, looking at it hopefully with as a pragmatic an attitude as possible, namely not, oh, it's not perfect, I give up, to
You're like,
it's
now we
not
have to work on
perfect yet.
perfectionism.
It's
Yeah.
not perfect yet.
Yes.
So if we want to try to use the sometimes I like to use the perfectionism as like a tool. It's like, okay, you want perfect, then you want to make this work, then don't you?
Consistency and
Let's see what went
repetition.
wrong so we can put it right. Yeah, let's see what went wrong so we can put it right for
You're
next
like,
time. Let's
fine.
actually work on that.
Yeah, you're like, all right, we're gonna use your ism here to channel you in the
That's
right direction. Oh,
absolutely.
that
And we'll
was,
deal with the perfection at another time. It's just like,
yeah.
let's just use it at this point for the motivation. I
I
will
love
say that
it.
quite openly, at which point, yes, they laugh, but it's just kind of like saying, like, let's use this problem actually as a point of help. Let's because we're not going to get rid of it, so let's use it.
I know.
And it helps to motivate things along. So
Oh my God,
make a sort of negative into a positive.
I know, that's hilarious. Oh, well, so nice chatting with you. I loved hearing your thoughts and perspectives. That was so fun. I
Thank
have like
you.
a million more questions that I can ask. I always feel this way at the end of podcasts. I'm like, oh my God, I have 10 questions I didn't get to, but I'm so glad that we were able to connect and get on the podcast. And I'll be releasing this soon, this week probably. And yeah, did you want to share where listeners can find you? Anything about the book? Feel
Yeah.
free.
Well, the book's being having a re-release, which should be in about a week's time.
Hmm.
Amazon Playing Fair. And so if people want to follow me, I generally put up a lot of posts about trying to raise awareness about mental health issues. And so I'm on Instagram under Alexandria Franklyn. I'm on TikTok under the same name. And you can recognize because I've got the black hair. No glasses though. So it's like
Yeah.
I'm on there. And the posts which I generally put up are about trying to raise awareness of various different types of mental health conditions, their symptomology, what the causes are, treatment options, things like that. Um, I'm mustering up the enthusiasm to start doing the face-to-face ones because I detest it when you're having to do with TikTok and you can see your face and just
You have to do it.
terrifying.
I started
Um,
doing it and I love them now, but it took me a few years to like get comfortable. I'm like finally like I don't give a shit anymore, but it took a long time.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Ah, yes. Well, that was so fun. I loved connecting. I'm glad that we got connected through a mutual friend. What a delightful chat. And I look forward to getting the full book when you're done with it.
Absolutely.
And for everyone tuning in, I would love for you to like, share, and subscribe if this episode resonated with you. And otherwise, we'll see you next time.
Fantastic.
Toodaloo.